All right, so we're back here. Oop, blew right by it. For our 11 a.m. conversation. I swear I can drive slides. On beat reporting, beat niche community reporting. The web is really good at massive conversations and also super good for really narrow ones. We've seen the rise of these really narrow communities. We technically think of one. My colleague Sabrina at Generosity does, and of course, our friend Elizabeth Green from Chalkbeat is an example of that too. So we want to have a conversation about when, how, why can smaller and focused be better, and some of the ramifications of that. Elizabeth and Sabrina, thank you for hanging out.
Thank you for having us.
I appreciate it. So, like, maybe let's start with how you guys actually identify. Elizabeth, how do you talk about Chalkbeat? Beat, niche, community. What is the words you guys internally to describe, and maybe a little bit of context of the education reporting you do in a growing number of cities.
We use the word news organization.
Wow! It's rare.
It's controversial.
But you don't make any distinction about how focused your editorial lens is.
Well, we're beat reporters. We are strong believers in beat reporting for sure.
So beat, you like beat, you stick to it.
Chalkbeat.
Right, sure. It's in the name.
So yeah, it's a news organization. We have 8 bureaus with teams from 1 to 5 local reporters. All of us are on the education beat. And then we have a small national desk that connects local newsrooms to each other, surfaces important local stories for national audiences. In each of our bureaus, we're also doing a lot of community engagement locally. The audience that we care most about is the local audience. The story we most care about is the local story. And this is really the way that we believe, is the best for the business model and the best for the journalism.
Mm-hmm. And we want to hit on
more about why.
Oh, well, good, because I'm going to ask you questions, so it would be really a shame if you said you didn't want to talk about any of it. Sabrina,
I've decided to talk more about why with you guys today.
Good. That's too kind. Sabrina, full disclosure, we're coworkers now, but I first came to know you before that. You've worked in community media and beat focused on religious. You've spanned in your career a bunch of what I would call these categories: community media, niche media, ethnic media, an array of like focused reporting. And I'm curious about how you self-identify. Community reporter, beat reporter, niche. What are the concepts that you identify with through that career?
I always think of it as community reporting, and you're right. I edited a Catholic newspaper. I was the managing editor of a Latino newspaper and website that published in 2 languages. And I continue to think of myself as a community reporter and editor at Generosity, because although it doesn't seem, it's not as easy to think of it as a community, the nonprofit and social impact sector is just that, a community with specific, one of the things that defines every aspect of community reporting that I've ever been involved in, and community journalism, is a shared sense of concerns and experiences that don't necessarily see their reflection in mainstream or general audience news media. And so, some of the conversations that are had at these community news organizations is richer and far more deeply grappling with certain issues than any general interest organization.
And Elizabeth, I gotta feel like, so the reason I even asked that first question is I think a fair bit of the consuming public of journalism or news, whatever category you want to talk, got really used to that late 20th century model of news organization with a lot of beats inside of them. And we're seeing these examples of organizations that take a beat and that is around which they build. I clearly am biased because I self-identify as this as well, but I'm kind of curious if you, like, this is a pretty far-flung group, and I wonder if you hate this group, but like Athletic, Curbed, Chalkbeat, certainly we technically identify as this. Do you see a through line between them?
Oh yeah. Oh, totally.
And why is that? Is that like a trend or an anomaly?
No, it's totally a trend. We're all the smartest people. We're doing the right thing.
Wow, this is my kind of panel.
One way I think about it is that the old model, the bundled model of many beats serving a single place, was broken by the internet, and the internet unbundled so many things and created a lot of more focused community possibilities. And the in the chat we're taking shade. I don't want that.
I'm saying I recognize pretty quickly that we're going to all agree. So I'm welcoming someone to like also challenge. But no, keep going.
Well, bring it on. So that model, I think, was broken by the unbundling, and all of the more commercial parts of the local newspaper have been shaved off into single products that are across multiple geographies rather than multiple products within one geography. And so one reason to pursue this model for a civic topic that's non-commercial, like public education, is survival. If we care about journalism, we should adapt to make journalism survive. But the advantages that it holds are not just that it's a stronger business model proposition on the internet than trying to recreate something that doesn't work on the internet and just put it on the internet. The journalism case, I think, is also really strong. As an education reporter in a newsroom with multiple beats that whose expertise is a place and not a topic, I personally lost a lot of context that I could have had and that Chalkbeat reporters do have from colleagues across multiple places. And I always had to pitch stories to an editor who couldn't care less about education. And often I think, editors who don't care about a topic or understand it will point reporters in the wrong direction. And then there's also the reality of serving the closer community of readers in a more focused way gives better journalistic results, more knowledgeable journalism. I think probably was somebody at this conference who coined the term knowledge-based journalism. I really believe in that. And yeah, does it mean that we lose something to have this model? Absolutely. There's no perfect silver bullet in any arena, but yes, we lose that old kind of newsroom with multiple topics sitting at a table. We lose that in a formal sense, but we can have that in an informal sense. And the gains, I think, are just really significant. So I really believe in this model, and I don't think it's a coincidence that so many great news organizations are pursuing it.
So I want to come back on the business model too, and I see in the chat, David, Jackie, you guys dropped stuff that I want to allude to. But Sabrina, I think the reason I really like your perspective on this is when I've talked about like niche or beat reporting, I often get really helpful pushback on one, B2B media has existed for a long while. Community media has listed for a long while. Ethnic media has listed for a long while. I think we probably mean, well, in a more consumer-facing lens, that's what the web has brought. Like, that's what's new, that a somewhat more consumer-facing beat-only identity is happening. But I want to address this idea that some of this idea of going at the community level is not, it didn't get invented by the internet. Do you, though, Sabrina, see that through line? Like, do you find commonality in what perhaps a community newspaper in 1970 would have felt like, and what a focused niche or beat reporting website is today? Do you draw a line there between those?
Yeah, I do, because I think, I approach it less as a business decision than as a journalist from a community saying, this is needs to be covered, or we need to be covered in a deeper, richer way. So for me, there isn't that difference qualitatively between now and the 1970s little, sort of neighborhood newspaper. Except, as Elizabeth alluded to, there's a global, we're all very global. And so these communities become of interest to the local community, becomes part of a global community grappling with the same issues. So you can work at a highly local, Latino-focused news organization, and you are actually going to also be read by people outside of your community who are interested in news about Latino U.S. populations.
David Boardman in the chat here puts out, I think, a real challenge that I at least do think about. If we go through this massive unbundling where all the beats kind of happen separately, the common refrain is, well, what happens to that town square? What tethers the Chalkbeat reader in one market and someone who reads, their athletic or local business publication? Do they never intersect? Jackie Lightfield in the chat points out, maybe whether we like it or not, the big tech platforms are that town square. But I wonder if either of you, if Elizabeth, Sabrina, if you have feelings about when does the Chalkbeat or the generosity reader bump into the reader of the other niche or beat?
I mean, pretending that people only read one publication is then we're just not living in reality, right? And I certainly worry about the public square. That's probably what, has been my driving passion in life, is trying to find ways to build a public square. But first of all, we have to meet people where they are. And then second of all, we have to acknowledge that where people are is a multiplicity of identities, a multiplicity of publications they're reading. We have our phones and we have our feeds, and then we have our newsletters, and we have to meet people where they are. Otherwise, we're going to have our heads in the sand. So I think that assuming too much of a supply side view of this issue does kind of cloud the issue, right? And yeah, there could be multiple publishers producing content, but from the consumer point of view, well, sometimes you're going to want to read a lot about one topic and you're going to be a really close member of that community. And then with the same person, the same part of you in a different part of your life, you won't be a parent of school-age children anymore. You won't be maybe a teacher anymore. You won't be on your PTA anymore, but you will still have to vote in a school board election. And so you'll say, well, at this stage of my life, I'm not going to subscribe to the daily Chalkbeat newsletter, but I am going to check in with Chalkbeat when I have to vote in a school board election. But now really I'm in my entrepreneurial phase. I'm running a tech business, and really it's technically that is my day-to-day
well done.
feed. And that doesn't mean that and I'm on a nonprofit board, and so I read Generosity
well done,
on a weekly basis. And all of this is okay. It's totally okay to have different kinds of brands that are all connecting to multiple people in different ways.
Yeah, I can't remember if this is Ben Horowitz or not, but I apologize for referencing a venture capitalist in a journalism conference, but the that every business cycle is either a bundling and unbundling. And Elizabeth, you brought up that phrase, and it's in the chat a little bit. And I wonder, when I read I wonder if we are as a trade trying to force this idea of keeping the bundle, even though we talk about it, we still want to believe that the news organization should be the town square. When, as you're kind of saying, it's just not what is happening. No one goes to one place to have their town square experience. I am of the mind that it is the tech platforms. We may hate that, but that is where that town square is. So Elizabeth, you actually alluded to like trying to recreate, or I shouldn't say recreate. You mentioned wanting that town square. Do you shudder at the thought of a bunch of publicly traded companies are our town square? Although, for much of the late 20th century, a bunch of newspapers were commercial enterprises and they were the town square.
I shudder at so many thoughts related to big tech companies. So yes, like so many of us, I share that. I think that we have to be more specific about what we want in a town square, right? And then think about, well, what are the behaviors that we mean by that? And what are the things, the conditions that we need to create to allow those behaviors to happen? And we also have to be honest about the extent to which we did have that more in the past, and we also didn't have that in the past. And just because there was a single newspaper per place, first of all, community newspapers were ethnic media, were providing for different communities already. It was already a very splintered country for so long, forever. And second, those of us who still, even while we read our community news, we also read maybe a mainstream commercial paper, or one of several in our town. We probably didn't read every single part of it at all, right? And so to me, like behaviors that look like a public square are having engagement in decisions that are going to affect a community. So engaging around decisions about schools, streets, public health. Like we're all about to live through an even, in my opinion, scarier cycle of a fiscal crisis at the state and local level, as the economic situation really hits the states and the local municipalities. And to me, a public square means diverse and comprehensive engagement by citizens in decision making about how we allocate resources as a community. And, was that happening before at the level that we would all hope? No. Was it happening better because there were more local news resources and because we were less polarized? Yes. So, okay, what do we do about that? We create more local news resources. We do not have to make them all created by one entity. I mean, the idea that we have to have one publisher to have one public square doesn't make any sense to me. And we have to just invest more in community engagement, informed community engagement, which means investing in what I think will be multiple different publishers with topical expertise and an ability to engage people thoughtfully and around those topics. Personally, I'm craving, in my community to understand my local police department better, and understand not only how it's serving my community, but how it fits into a national picture. As Sabrina said, we're all global in our access to information, so pretending otherwise is crazy. But nobody's giving me that right now. Nobody's giving me a way to engage in a conversation about education in my community, because we don't have a Chalkbeat here yet. And or the nonprofit sector in my community, because there is no generosity where I live. Bureau, it would be great to have it. So, I crave that, and I personally don't care if it's multiple publishers. In fact, I will trust it more if they're subject matter expertise experts than if it's somebody who doesn't really know what they're talking about.
Yeah, Sabrina, I wonder how you view that. I see Ashley Pascal in the chat calls out, like underlines what Elizabeth alluded to too, which is I wonder how much we want to believe everyone read A1 through A13 and then went B1 through B5 and then everyone went to C and then everyone went D and then everyone and then they later went to the Charlie Brown cartoons, comics. But maybe not. Maybe you just read the one columnist. I think that the word serendipity shows up a lot in these reports on that loss of town square. Whether we like it or not, that is what the algorithm are attempting to do right now anyway. So Sabrina, I wonder just how you viewed your own career arc through that. Does that Are you optimistic or pessimistic about being able to better inform a citizenry in this web era? Sabrina, is it scary? Are you optimistic or pessimistic? I've never asked you that question.
I'm actually really optimistic.
Okay.
Um,
And you don't
in
toss around optimism, so this is a
No,
real
I
answer,
know.
folks. This
I'm
is
a
not
total
Sabrina
Debbie
doesn't just say,
Downer most of
yeah.
the time
So this is
about
shocking.
almost everything. But because look, as somebody who spent a significant amount of time um, dealing with the Latino news consumer, we already knew, and in two languages, we already knew that there were areas that folks who were Latinx and would read in Spanish would read or would accept from news organizations, and those who were, primarily English speakers would, gravitate to different areas. So, like for example, we knew that younger bilingual Latinx news consumers still liked their news about sports in Spanish, still liked their news about entertainment in Spanish, because these are, sort of areas of cultural markers that general interest publications don't cover in the same way. And so I'm very positive, because what I see is the strengthening of community news organizations inevitably enriches the conversation about that community. It inevitably deepens the coverage that even general interest publications then do. I think I brought this up at the first session. It's inconceivable to anybody who has spent any time in the Latino media that everybody was so shocked and surprised that there was a diversity in the way Latino voters vote. And I think that community news organizations, really, really are good at dissolving the idea of monoliths of any sort. And so on that level, I think they're very important.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. We're at 11:30. We stop and we go to breakout groups. So I want to get through a couple little checkpoints to set people up for that conversation. I see Stephen dropped in the chat. Stephen dropped in the chat a question that I think I can tie back to. He asks a bit like, presumably a lot of beats tend to start real narrow. Makes sense. If you were to start a beat publication today, those first handful of stories, and then over time you can build audience. And I assume all of us go through some period of you test those boundaries of what is in beat or not. I have to feel like that's a journey that you've gone through too, Elizabeth, of like, is that a story or is that not? And it's both an audience growth element, but obviously at some point you go too far wide, you stop losing what makes you focused. And so I wonder, I'm curious about here from both of you, but maybe Elizabeth, starting with you, how has that journey gone for you guys in widening the beat at times, or testing that to see how wide that audience should go? What is a Chalkbeat story, particularly when we're still at the very earliest days of this era, so lots of gaps in beats still exist. And I know we sometimes feel that stress of, should we be widening to that beyond our beat? Talk a little bit about that journey of stretching the beat for audience, or even just like journalistic instinct.
Yeah, that's a great question. We started in 4 places. We actually started in one place in our sort of earliest journey. And then we opened and we merged with another place. So that was 2. Then we opened 2 more, and that was when we officially were Chalkbeat. And every time we went to a new geographic community, there was some learning curve, and expanding to a new geographic community means building trust from the beginning, figuring out how to do that. We've also expanded the topical nature too. We started out covering more a pure K to 12 public education, and we've expanded really with the community we cover, which is the community focused on educational equity, expanding educational equity. There's been an expansion of that sort of policy and practice tent to include early childhood education, and now also to include post-secondary. And so kind of following the community works well. I also think that following the community is another way to think about our geographic expansion, actually, because people don't just live in one place, right? They move around, and a lot of our readers have worked in Memphis and then moved to Chicago and then moved to New York City, and have experience with multiple places and their schools, and they care about multiple places in their schools. So, I think that the big lesson for us is just follow what the community is interested in and what the community is telling us. And it usually does really match with our journalistic interest areas.
What? And I saw Davis, by the way, I missed the chat a little bit earlier of noticing, like, yeah, what gets lost in the transition. I view that we are just in this grand, terrifying, disheartening period of creative destruction, and another layer is being developed. But even if I could be optimistic of where we go, we don't always know how long that dark winter can be. So I think Davis's point is an important one. One last thing I want to hit on in this topic, before we get there, optimism justified, is like the rise of the individual reporter brand, which either excites you or makes you throw up in your mouth, depending on your perspective. And I'm kind of curious about both of your thoughts, and I'm gonna throw a little poll to get like a test of our audience's perspective too. But like the reporter brand, this is like use of Substack and Substack clones, but also like we're seeing folks start to stream, Patreon. It's individuals leaving brands. It's news organizations elevating more reporters in one. And Elizabeth, Sabrina, I'm wondering if you think the individual reporter brand, individual reporter above maybe even the news organization's brand, force for good, sign of the apocalypse, no damn idea. Where do you two land on that?
Sabrina?
I think it's positive, actually. I think it's positive for journalists and kind of a wake-up call for news organizations, because too long a news organization acted as if journalists were replaceable, and they were just cookie cutter. A new person in there made no difference. Made no difference if they had ever any experience of the community they were covering, or the topic, or the beat. And I think so to a certain extent, my positive reaction to it is because I think it is a tool that can be used to enhance equity. So it gives journalists, a bit of leverage. If you are a journalist of color who has a tremendously dedicated and loyal following, and your news organization is not treating you well, or is, making your ascent, in professionally difficult, they deserve to have you and your dedicated followers leave and have, a way to generate income from it, which of course is, a Substack. If your newsletter readers are paying you, rather than the news organization you came from, there's a definite actual, there's a feeling of this that goes beyond just like, oh, damn, we just lost a popular person.
Elizabeth, before you answer, just to make sure we don't necessarily all agree in perfect harmony, because what interest is that? One challenge that I have heard from that rise is then it also, you'd say like, at some point it becomes the reporter has to do that. At some point, if your relationship to direct audience, your own brand becomes your strength, you could see down the road, does that mean reporters essentially have to do that? You have to maintain this giant personal industry brand to be able to succeed. That's at least a criticism that I have heard of that. I think my bias that I'm probably closer to Sabrina in personal belief, but I've heard that challenge. What do you? How do you view this,
I
Elizabeth?
sign of the apocalypse, so I can provide.
Good. All right. You
I
need to have
can
some
provide
perspective.
a
Yeah. So
counterweight.
say that. That's good.
I guess my concern is that.
And you're not alone, I should say. I'll put up the poll. The force for good is there, but you're not alone in that perspective.
My concern is that those who are elevating the personal brand model as a scalable solution to our challenges are wrong, and it's a dangerous assumption to make that this can scale. That the journalism we need will be provided for by individual brands is not going to work. It's a subscription business model assumption that is deeply flawed, whether it's at the institutional level or the individual brand level. And so I don't disagree with the potential benefits or the benefits of individual voice. And I agree with the point about a potential avenue for equity. I also can see for sure that a more of a splintering has equal and opposite negative consequences, where there's no stopping bad actors from pursuing that. But most importantly, my objection is it doesn't scale. And so investing in assuming that Patreon is going to save us is the fastest way to the apocalypse.
Heard on that. All right, that's great. So all right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna throw you and everyone into breakout groups. I'll broadcast these prompts. Elizabeth, Sabrina, thank you for that conversation, folks. If you want, you can